Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. We'll be keeping a close eye on Boeing in particular because of a story we're going to talk about in just a moment. But with regard to equities here in Africa, 2019 has been pretty abysmal for most of the listed Kenyan entities. Today really wasn't any different. CIC Insurance issued a profit warning for the 2019 fiscal year. Full details are going to be out in March, but management right now is citing a range of adverse claims that they say has essentially eaten into group profitability. Shares over 24% in the red so far in 2019. Here's what's coming up tonight. Boeing supplier shares take a hit as a plane maker suspends production of its 737 MAX. There's still no end in sight for France's massive strikes against pension reform. And we'll give you a taste of Uganda's coffee. It's one of the best that Africa has to offer. There's quite a bit to get through tonight, but let's start in the aviation sector. The American plane maker Boeing has announced plans to temporarily, it says, suspend the production of its 737 MAX starting in January. Now, the move comes as the Chicago-based company is waiting for the grounded jetliner to be recertified by aviation authorities in order to return to service in the wake of two deadly crashes. CGTN's Jagruti Dave now explores how Boeing's latest decision is set to impact the American economy.
In a statement, Boeing said safely returning the 737 MAX to service is the company's top priority, but it says it will stop the production of the aircraft while it awaits certification from US regulators. Instead, Boeing says it will prioritize the delivery of the 737 MAX planes that it had built in the 9 months that the jets were grounded after the two deadly crashes. Now, Boeing is a major employer in the United States, and it says it doesn't expect layoffs as a consequence of the production of the aircraft stopping. It says the affected employees will continue to work on the 737 or will be temporarily assigned to other teams. Now, Boeing is America's largest manufacturing exporter, and the MAX is Boeing's fastest selling plane. And airlines stocks fell in the after-hours trading after the announcement was made, and there are concerns about the impact on other companies that are in Boeing's supply chain, operators who use the 737 MAX in their fleet of jets, and also the wider US economy. The decision in March of this year to ground the 737 jets had already slowed growth and productivity in the US. So since March, Boeing's shares dropped by 25%. And some say that halting production could hit the US economy even harder. However, an economist at Moody Analytics speaking to the New York Times offered an alternative perspective. He suggested that because the US economy was doing well and that jobs growth was strong, the country was prepared to bear the brunt of the stoppages at this time. However, regulators say they are unlikely to approve the operation of the 737 MAX anytime before February of next year. Jagruti Dave, CGTN, Washington.
All right, then, so let's dig a little deep into this particular story. Julia Sun joins us now from New York with more data on this. So, Julia, walk us through the company's rationale for suspending production for now. It certainly will help, at least in the short term, with cash conservation. But what damage will it do to the company's finances and relationships with key suppliers and clients?
Well, a lot of damage, and let me just start by saying this production freeze comes after the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, decided to not let the 737 MAX return to commercial service. Boeing simply did not meet the milestones the FAA outlined, and it's not Boeing's choice to get grounded, right? But the facts are they aren't allowed to ship the 737 MAX jets and aren't getting paid for them. That's the big damage. And sure, let's talk about its relationships with the suppliers and the airlines, and they're very different. For the suppliers, these suppliers, they understand that the regulators are involved for all the legitimate reasons. This is simply a risk of being a supplier. Boeing is huge. A typical supplier would not want to damage its dealing with Boeing. That relationship might just be fine. When Boeing comes back, they'll say yes again. It's a different matter with the airlines. For the airlines that have already rushed to buy the plane or scheduled flights with it, they will have to change their plans. Some of them will have to scale back on their expansion plans. For travelers, this could mean fewer seats and higher airfare. And as you know, higher airfare doesn't mean less revenue for the airline, but it could mean more unhappy customers. Therefore, the relationship between the airlines and Boeing are more likely to take a bigger hit.
Indeed, but let's just step back for a moment here, because this is an aircraft that has a pretty torrid record right now and a really dim public perception. So why not just ditch the plane and start from scratch on a new design? Yes, it'll cost billions, but surely that's pocket change compared to bringing back an aircraft that people will keep asking, is this safe?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because this is a case of safety first. And like you said, the 737 MAX, it has been grounded since the crash of the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. There really is no business case to not selling it, simply because the 737 MAX has been Boeing's best-selling commercial airplane. And until the last quarter of 2019, Boeing continued to manufacture this jets, according to Reuters, at the rate of 42 per month. And they still purchase parts from suppliers at the rate of up to 52 units per month, even though deliveries are frozen until the regulators approve the aircraft to fly commercially again. Boeing does have multiple other planes on the assembly line or in the hangar ready to ship, but there is no reason to ditch your best-selling plane when you absolutely do not have to. And it looks like the FAA did not keep the door completely closed, and Boeing is fighting for that.
Indeed. Let's see what passengers say once it does come back to market. Turning to the FAA, it says it won't clear the return to service of the 737 MAX before next year. But what do we know about the steps that Boeing must hit, the goals they have to hit, before the FAA can even consider approving the aircraft's return?
Yeah, Boeing is really taking its time because FAA does have a set of regulatory guidelines. One of the points of contention has to do with software updates. The investigators found that flight control software designed to stop a aerodynamic stall was a major factor in the crashes, and Boeing is updating the software to make it less aggressive. Now, U.S. officials have told Reuters that FAA approval to resume flying is not likely until at least February 2020 and could be delayed until March or after. And the agency, FAA, have to approve Boeing's software fixes to the plane and test them with a group of foreign pilots. In addition, the FAA's own test pilots have to fly the plane. And on top of that, Fortune magazine actually reported that the agency is drawing up a new training course for pilots before they can fly the plane, being very cautious, and that isn't expected to be completed until January. As for what the airlines will have to do to return the 737 MAX to service, airlines will have to install, for one, Boeing's new software, run a series of maintenance checks on their idle jets, and implement the recommended pilot training courses. The latter, which could vary from country to country, really depends on where you are. U.S. carriers have said the process will take at least a month following FAA's approval, but regulators, again, have not approved any changes.
Indeed, Ethiopian Airlines was the only major African operator of the 737 MAX. But how clients on your end of the world, like Southwest, which is a big buyer of the 737 MAX, have they given up on the plane? How are they coping with having that fleet essentially grounded for the better part of a year now?
Yeah, well, the short answer to that is no. Major airlines in the U.S. Are not ready to give up on the plane completely, but they're certainly being pushed into a corner, so to speak. And the deepening Boeing crisis is crippling their growth plan. As I said earlier, Southwest Airlines, for example, is one of Boeing's top customers. It's still waiting for the deliveries of hundreds of 737 MAX planes that have already been built. Today, Southwest Airlines said it is removing roughly 300 weekday flights from its total peak day schedule through April 13th. That's nearly double the amount it had already canceled through March 6th. Meanwhile, another U.S. airline, American Airlines, has extended its 737 MAX cancellations through April 6th, and United Airlines is scheduling without the plane until early March. Now, U.S. officials have told Reuters that FAA's approval to resume flying is, again, not likely until at least February, possibly later. Analysts are estimating that Boeing has the ability to deliver a maximum of 70 planes to customers each month, and that means they can play catch up, right? They can get through that backlog. It would take about 6 months or so, although keep in mind that the airline's first priority will probably be getting the 737 MAX that are already grounded back into service first. And 737 MAX operators like Southwest and United have said they are studying Boeing's announcement on the production halt. They were unable to comment immediately when we reached out on the impact of their schedules and capacity plan.
Indeed. One last question for you, Julia. So Boeing shares have actually fallen by quite a bit, 12% in the last 4 weeks. But what's the general range of views in the company on the street?
Well, on the street, let's just say that most of Boeing's top shareholders, they're in for the long game. They're in it for the long haul. Let's see who are Boeing's top shareholders, right? Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, State Street, Blackstone, Jennison Associates, all those, they are playing the long game. So I would say they aren't necessarily looking at a 4-week period. Boeing's share, they're essentially back to where they started back in early 2019. But if you look at its performance in 2017 and 2018, essentially from when President Donald Trump got elected, it was trading $100 or so back in 2016, and now it's close to $300, nearly $200 billion market cap. So I would say that is still above market performance, and generally analysts think they can ride through this crisis.
Indeed, and of course we should remember Boeing is a pretty diversified aviation company. They've got the commercial side, but also a fair bit of defense and space contracts as well. Julie Sun in New York, thank you. Now, still on aviation matters, South African tourism is celebrating a major festive season highlight. That's thanks to the launch of United Airlines' first ever non-stop flight from New York straight into Cape Town. Now, that flight has been hailed as a great moment, not just for the tourism sector, but it also expands economic opportunities on both sides of the Atlantic. With the details, here's CGTN's Renee Delcalm.
The first United Airlines flight ever to touch down on South African soil. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner arrived in Cape Town from New York carrying 252 passengers.
This inaugural flight is a big deal for South Africa. We've worked for years, months, the last few weeks to try and get uplift out of North America into South Africa. Big milestone for South Africa. Happy times.
For United Airlines, we're incredibly proud to be here. We are so pleased to be offering the only nonstop flight between North America and Cape Town, South Africa. It's our first ever flight to South Africa. And with this new flight, people in South Africa have 80 plus cities that they can connect to. So if you don't want to go to New York, if you want to go beyond New York, we can carry you there.
Passengers and crew were greeted by local government officials and the American ambassador to South Africa with a special Cape Town welcome.
It just felt magical and powerful, and I just kept thinking, what is it going to feel like to land and be there? And so now I'm here. There's so much excitement. There's partying, dancing, music, and just feels like home.
I think anytime you have a direct route to South Africa or to a place in Africa, it just opens up the opportunity. It makes it more accessible to a lot of people. So I just think this is brilliant. It's not just a direct flight to the country, it's a direct flight to the continent. So that's beautiful.
The non-stop flight from New York to Cape Town shaves off at least 4 hours of the over 12,500 kilometer journey between the two cities. And it's expected to help boost the economy in Cape Town and South Africa.
This is a great moment for the city of Cape Town, for the Western Cape and for South Africa, because at the end of the day, with more tourists, we will have more income and more jobs in the city of Cape Town and in the Western Cape. And we estimate that as a result of this flight, we will generate about 153 million rand in additional tourism spending in the city of Cape Town and in the Western Cape.
This is an honor for me and an honor for United Airlines to be able to serve this new city, this new destination. We're looking forward to a very wonderful flight this evening and for many more flights to come in the future.
United Airlines will fly 3 flights a week out of Cape Town to New York and 3 weekly flights from the Big Apple to South Africa's mother city. Renee Dalcom, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
All right, then a quick run through some company headlines now. The state-owned freight, rail and port group Transnet, that's in South Africa, it says it plans to approach the courts. The South African company is seeking to have a number, what it claims are controversial contracts for the procurement of about 1,064 locomotives declared unlawful and essentially declared null and void. The contracts initially were meant to upgrade Transnet's aging fleet, but they've been plagued by allegations of fraud and kickbacks. In the hydrocarbon sector, the French energy giant Total has signed an agreement with Angola's state-owned oil company, Sonangol, to acquire interests in 2 blocks. According to Total, so far wells drilled in those 2 blocks have led to 4 hydrocarbon discoveries. Total is going to pay $400 million to Sonangol upon completion of the transaction, but another $100 million will be added when a final investment decision is made. Elsewhere, the share price of the global integrated chemicals group Sasol has risen by nearly 10%. That comes after the South African company reported rising production at its embattled Lake Charles project in the United States. Due to cost overruns over there, Sasol's share price has been under pressure. It's dropped by about a third in its market cap so far this year. And finally, the UK's competition watchdog has launched a formal inquiry into Google's takeover of the cloud data analytics company Luca Data Sciences. The decision comes just 2 weeks after the Competition and Markets Authority said it had reasonable grounds to suspect that Google was planning to roll Luca fully into its parent company Alphabet as opposed to keeping it as an entirely separate entity. That's a run for your company headlines. We're 17 minutes into the hour. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be looking at the exit by the Botswana retailer Choppies from 3 more African markets. And Nigeria's inflation rate has risen yet again. This time it's close to 12% in November.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head into the world of retail. The Botswana-based budget retailer Choppies is exiting from 3 more African markets: Mozambique, Tanzania and Kenya. This comes less than a fortnight after it said it would sell its loss-making South African operation. Now, the group will continue operating in 4 countries: Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia and Namibia. The company posted a loss of over $40 million after tax in delayed results for the fiscal year that ended in June 2019, but more recent data is not available just yet. So let's get into the details with CGTN's Sumitra Naidu. She joins us now live from Johannesburg with more data on this. So the retailer here, Choppies, they're cutting operations in a range of countries, but what went wrong in South Africa? Revenues there were up by 48% between 2017 and 2018. So what went wrong?
Yes, Ramah. Well, Choppies has been in operation for 27 years. It first opened in South Africa back in 2008. And as you say, it was successful here. But the problems first started coming to the fore last year when the company was suspended on the JSE and the Botswana Stock Exchange because it failed to submit its financials on time. Then allegations of accounting irregularities emerged, discrepancies related to how the group accounted for bulk sales and inventories at its stores in South Africa. There was also issues around store acquisitions. There's 88 stores in South Africa. There was also speculation around store acquisitions in Zimbabwe, which it opened back in 2013. There was some infighting as well amongst board members, but the fight centered around the co-founder and CEO, Ramah Nyang. He was accused of financial misappropriation. Now, Otapatu was suspended in May this year. The retailer then undertook legal and forensic investigations, and the reports apparently found that Otapatu took up a substantial chunk of shares in a competitor of Choppies, and he took that out under his name. Now, amidst all of this wrangling, the retailer ran low on cash flows and has been struggling to keep operational. A restructuring officer, Redford Capital, was appointed to review the Choppies business and identify action plans to improve that business. Then in August this year, Choppies said it was considering pulling out of South Africa completely and was then open to offers. The South African subsidiaries have been trading at a substantial loss for the last 2 years. This is the statement that was issued on SENS of the JSE. There were a lack of cash flow resulted in trade creditors, suppliers not being paid on time, and refusing to supply stock to these stores. So of course this caused all of these issues in the stores, and they finally came to a conclusion that they would pull out of the country. Ramah?
Indeed. So the retailer said in its last operational statement that it plans to sell these operations in South Africa. The last number that comes to mind was that this was a $400 million or close to it business as far as turnover is concerned. Do we know who they might be selling to and when that deal might be concluded?
So the people that they're selling to, the company that they're selling to is called Kind Investments. I'm not familiar with the company. There isn't much information about it. I did some searching and found that it was incorporated in March this year. Entrepreneur Rehan Hassim was appointed as director in August this year. At the same time, Redford Capital, the chief operating officer, was asking for expressions of interest. Hassim has strong connections in Limpopo and Polokwane. He has strong connections with Polokwane's political class, which is where Choppies first made its entry into South Africa. And he's been associated with South African auction company Orco. So there isn't any more information about this company. It was just incorporated a few months ago. So there isn't too much information. But, the SEN's announcement to the JSE says the deal needs to be completed by 2020. The purchaser is obliged to make an immediate interest-free loan to Choppies of R1 million, and that needs to be utilized to fund immediate working capital requirements and purchase stock. So essentially what it's doing is giving the company a chance to continue operating over the December and January period, and it will cease operations 2020. Well, that deal needs to be concluded. Whether Kind Investments will continue with the stores, we don't know at this stage. Ramah?
Indeed. One last question for you, Sumitra. The retail picture in South Africa is a pretty interesting one. Pick and Pay shares, they're a massive retailer there, down 2% so far this year. Massmart's, their JSE listed shares, they're down by over 50% so far in the year. Granted, their respective dividend yields don't look exactly enticing, 2.9%, 3.5%. But what is it that investors do not like about large-scale retail in South Africa?
Well, I don't think it's a case really of they don't like large retail necessarily. This was a really lucrative sector once upon a time, a few years ago. It's really the impact of the economy at this stage. The retail sector has been under immense pressure. Interest rates haven't been cut for a long time. Utility costs are rising, food costs are rising, transport costs are rising. Consumers are under a lot of pressure. Spending has been declining steadily. There's just no appetite at the moment. South Africans are traditionally spenders and not savers, but there's so little but disposable income right now that they've cut back on their spending dramatically. There's been new competition in the market too, so it's been a tough trading environment for the big retailers especially. There's also a huge amount of regulation to get through, labor laws to get through, and this is why some of the big retailers like when Walmart came into the country, this was some of the legal hurdles that it needed to cross before it came into the country. But these are some of the stumbling blocks for the big retailers at the moment. But it's really, I think, a nature of what the environment presents at this point. Ramah?
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Sumitra Naidu in Johannesburg. Thank you very much. Now, on to Africa's largest economy, Nigeria. Headline inflation over there accelerators to 11.9% in the month of November. Food prices over there just keep climbing, and that comes in the wake of a decision by the federal government to close its borders to the movement of goods. Now, the move was aimed at curbing smuggling across its land borders, but now critics point out that this is threatening free trade right across the region. Nigeria's central bank did hold its benchmark lending rate at 13.5% for the fourth meeting in a row in November. It said at the time that the impact of these land border closures on prices, in its view, will be reactionary and temporary. That's the key word from the CBN. But the IMF was also warning that Nigeria will experience even more inflationary pressure because it has an excessive amount of liquidity sloshing about in its banking system. Still in Nigeria, the Senate has called for a state of emergency on unemployment in the West African oil producer, with over 23% of Nigerians unemployed and less functional industries to create jobs, not to mention, of course, the trade shenanigans we've just spoken about. Parliament is now pressing government to place all unemployed Nigerian young people on an allowance. With the details, here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam.
It's been over 3 years since Mike Arinze graduated from higher institution. But the electrical engineering graduate has yet to secure a job since leaving school. Now he grills and sells fish to eke a living. And this is one of the many survival trades he's had to learn over the years.
I must tell you, it wasn't easy. I have to do kinds of jobs just to see me, keep me going. I have to learn vulcanizer work. I have to learn grilling. I'm a mason like this and I'm talking to you. So I do wiring. So I had to do all meaningful jobs just to keep me going.
There are nearly 16 million youths who suffer the same fate as Mike. Nigeria churns out on average 500,000 graduates yearly. Unemployment rate here in Nigeria maintained an average 23.68% between 2014 and 2018. It hit an all-time high of 38% in the second quarter of 2018 and its lowest in the fourth quarter of 2014 at 11.7%. The statistics currently stands at 23.1%, but without necessary interventions, it's projected to scale up to about 33.5% by next year. And that's why Parliament is calling for a state of emergency on unemployment. In a recent resolution, the Senate urged government to initiate a sustainable unemployment benefit fund for its unemployed population. It's coming at a time the World Bank is forecasting Nigeria's on the verge of yet another recession. More so, the nation is looking to fund its $34.7 billion budget from external borrowing.
I think it's very, very unrealistic based on the fact that the economy is crumbling. There are different sectors of the country, of the economy that is yelling for attention. We have to borrow and keep borrowing to fund our budget. It's very unrealistic.
There are also concerns about the disbursement of such funds, as previous social empowerment programs have been marred by corruption.
If you're creating funds like this and schemes like this to help unemployed people, what is going to end up doing to the economy is opening up ways for corrupt politicians to fill in names of people they feel or they say to the government that they are unemployed, and at the end of the day, embezzle money out of the government's coffers. So it's not a good one.
Revamping the nation's moribund industries, creating graduate apprenticeship schemes, and initiating tax incentives for private employers are some of the ways experts suggest could improve Nigeria's worrying unemployment statistics. Kelechi Amekalam, CGT and Abuja, Nigeria.
On to North Africa now, where Tunisia's citrus output is expected to fall by as much as 35%. That's according to the country's regional union of agriculture and fisheries. Now, authorities say that decline is due to high temperatures, but also diseases like the dreaded citrus black spot. With the details, here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi.
Citrus forests enable extend over 20,000 hectares, mainly in the regions of Menzel Bouzelfa, Beni Khaled, Bouargoub and Slimane. Regional authorities explained this drop in citrus production by several factors, including the spread of the citrus tristeza, which has affected about 30% of crops, as well as the appearance of the citrus black spot disease.
There's a lack of agricultural supervision and early diagnosis of diseases in the main production regions. The farmers need more assistance to face the spread of diseases.
Also asserts that the decline in production is due to the effects of climate change.
This season is characterized by rising temperatures and the appearance of sirocco at the end of May 2019, at the time of flowering and bud development, which subsequently caused significant quantities of fruit to fall.
Agronomists argue that the decrease in production generally benefits the farmer, since the lack of supply leads to an increase in selling prices, while the achievement of a production of 500,000 tons in 2016-2017 resulted in considerable losses for farmers.
Farmers do not benefit from the rising prices. Only middlemen who control the market and take advantage at the expense of the farmers and the consumers. We lose money, but middlemen always make profits because they don't have any cost.
The citrus sector suffers from the problem of salinity of irrigation water and lack of water in general. The drop in production is also explained by the excessive use of chemical pesticides and the unstudied import of new citrus fruit species. Tunisian authorities are now preparing for the citrus and Maltese export season, which starts in the first week of January each year. This variety is among the best in the world in terms of quality and the high selling price in Europe and the Gulf region. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Right, then time for a short break on the programme. Here's what's coming up next. There doesn't seem to be any end in sight for France's strikes against pension reforms. We'll explore why. And protests, as well as a weakening economy, are having a compounded knock-on effect on Hong Kong's property values. For a look at some economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the programme. On to the business now of reforming public services. Travel and public services in general across France were disrupted yet again on Tuesday. Strikes against pension reforms entered their 13th day. Workers from right across the French labour force, teachers, doctors, they all joined transport workers in this ongoing nationwide strike. At the same time, hundreds of thousands took to the streets in cities across the country. They want the country's president, Emmanuel Macron, to abandon his plan for a single unified pension scheme. Now, the president argues that the retirement overhaul is needed and it will make a convoluted, outdated pension system more fair, but also importantly, financially sustainable. But the critics say these planned reforms will force millions to work longer in order to get the same benefits.
Il a perdu, Macron. La bataille de l'opinion, il a perdu.
Macron has lost the battle for public opinion. He has lost. Everybody has understood. The massive majority of people know that they have a lot to lose. They themselves, their children, and the future generation.
La bataille de l'opinion, il l'a déjà perdu.
La revendication principale, c'est une justice.
Our main demand is social justice. For years, especially since this government took power, we have been seeing our social rights melt under the sun. This pension reform is the last straw.
If we accept Christmas break, then we are stopping the strike. We have to stop Macron. We have to be logical. People didn't strike for about 15 days just to stop and say, let's go see Santa Claus.
Now, protests, trade tensions and an economy essentially in recession, these are all combining to hit property prices in Hong Kong pretty hard. By some estimates, luxury prices on the real estate market could fall by as much as 20% next year, with regular housing also forecast to decline by roughly 10%. CGTN's Nathan King toured one high-end property in Hong Kong to bring you the following report.
Hong Kong real estate, notoriously expensive, one of the main drivers of the economy, has for years seen solid gains. But this year and next, however, look bleak.
The kitchen they make it very modern and very usable.
Ada Ng has been in Hong Kong real estate for about 30 years. As she shows me around this 120 million Hong Kong dollar apartment That's 50 million US. She says business has been slow. Apartments like this used to sell in days. Now it's months. And since the protest began, prices are way down.
From our social movement happened from May of this year, while June from right now, I think at least over 10 to 20% down about the price.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
it's quite a lot.
This apartment, perched on the hills above Hong Kong's central district, is a rare find. 2 floors, a duplex with walk-in closets, the size of some small Hong Kong apartments. It's the sort of apartment high earners yearn for, but people have stopped buying, not just from Hong Kong, but also mainland and beyond.
I think the purchaser, for example, 100%, over 70 to 80% is Hong Kong people buy, okay? About 20 to 30% from outside people. This for, in Hong Kong, we have like to hire the maid to take care of our family.
Yeah.
So for the Philippine maid, they will stay this room.
So this is a bedroom for the maid?
The bedroom for the maid.
Above the washer and dryer?
Washer and dryer, yes.
Discounts of between 10 and 20% would normally lead to a lot of buying, especially at the luxury end of the market. Interest rates in Hong Kong are just 2.5%. But it's the uncertainty about the local and Greater China economy added to protests and trade woes that's giving everyone pause.
But right now, Hong Kong has something happen,
Yeah.
Social movement, and not really know what happened in the world, not only here, the world. So everybody want to keep looking to see what happened in the future, and then they will try to put their money big money back to the market.
So with prices falling, could this be a buying opportunity? Ada, unlike many experts, thinks next year will be better. But for those of you tempted to dip your toes into the Hong Kong property market, well, you're going to need a lot of cash. But the real problem is that when you come to buy an apartment in Hong Kong, over 10 million Hong Kong dollars, you have to put about 50% of the asking price down straight away. So that would mean $7.5 million US dollars just to make sure you could buy this place. Nathan King, CGTN, Hong Kong.
Now, the World Brand Lab has released its rankings for the 2019 World's 500 most influential brands. Benefiting from business growth in cloud computing and self-driving tech, last year's runner-up Google beat Amazon to top the list. Amazon dropped back to second place. Microsoft, however, which saw a sharp increase in net profit last year, was ranked third. State Grid is the highest-ranking Chinese firm in this year's rankings. It's in 28th place. Tencent and Haier came in second and third, respectively. Suzhou Construction Machinery Group made its very first debut. Based on global influence, the ranking of the world's 500 top brands tracks 3 key indicators: market share, brand loyalty, and global leadership.
We always believe that the key to a strong brand is leading technology, everlasting products, customer value, and emotional identity. Chinese brands should adapt to digital transformation, empower themselves continuously by internationalization, and move up the value chain, because only in this way can we make great strides towards a global high-end market and truly deserve the title of a world's top brand.
The animated movies Neza and Abominable are 2 box office hits with legions of fans across the planet. Both films are set and produced, at least partially, in China, but they're making waves in international markets. Here's CGTN's Marilu now, attending the Singapore Media Festival to look at the growing global trend for Chinese animation in What's Hot tonight.
Distributed in Mandarin, Neza, a Chinese-produced animated movie telling the story of the mythological Chinese deity, became the highest-grossing animated film of all time this summer, a record which was previously held by Oscar-winning animation Zootopia.
Neza is very popular in China. It's not as familiar to the rest of the world yet. I think we're at an early stage in creating a story in China that will be popular globally, and that kind of leads a little bit to Abominable.
Abominable was a co-production between Chinese and American film studios, Shanghai-based Pearl Studio and DreamWorks Animation. The animated family movie landed at the top of the box office during its opening weekend in America, with around $21 million in ticketing.
Abominable is a great example of the start of the collaborations that I think hold the most prospects for China and for the kind of global creative community, which is you have talent from China, talent from the US, working together on a story that may be set in China, but it has global values and has global appeal.
As a new generation of global viewers watch Chinese animated films, there are hopes that the floodgates of international Chinese movie success might have been flung open.
I think content itself is the best vehicle for soft power. And with the new generation, generation millennium or the Z generation, so they have a much broader horizon than our generation. And the majority of them has a better language skill set. So it would be promising to see when this generation growing up, they can tell a Chinese story in international languages, in universal languages.
The international popularity of Ne Zha and Abominable came as a shock to many, as these are stories about Chinese characters and voiced by Asian actors, which traditionally wouldn't gain traction in the West. But industry insiders at the Singapore Media Festival are not surprised by the success, citing a rapidly growing film and animation market in China and an increasing appetite across Asia for regional stories.
Asian content is so rich with storytelling. I mean, we are an ancient culture. All the Asian cultures are over 2,000 years old. And there's so many instances in the past that we can take inspiration from. And one of the reasons why Asian stories are far more mature is that the elements within these stories are rich with heritage, which cultural aspects. They talk about great value systems, which probably are missing in a lot of Western storytelling.
With increasing investment into the Chinese film industry domestically and internationally, homegrown creative talent is able to cut their teeth on Chinese content creation. As the skill set in the country continues to rise, the consensus is that the cream of the crop will break barriers and cross borders. Miro Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. So farmers in the biggest cocoa producer in the world, they're heading for a rather curious clash with the government, which wants to push prices higher by restricting supply. But farmers want to do the complete opposite. Benchmark cocoa prices have been falling since November. They're down about 4.8% to today's prices, around 25.45. And they got to an 18-month peak in part because Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana moved to raise guaranteed prices to farmers by nearly 15%. But when farmers respond as you'd expect by increasing output, that's a bit of a problem for the authorities in both countries. Here's what's coming up next. We'll get you a taste of coffee from Uganda, one of the best that Africa has to offer. We'll also check out Made in Africa smartphones that are now trading across some 43 countries around the world.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, if you happen to be in West Africa, the argument often is who makes the better jollof, Ghana or Nigeria. If you're in East Africa, though, the question is who's producing the best possible coffee, right? Now, getting the most out of any coffee machine is as much about choosing the right kind of coffee. Although there's an enormous variety of coffee beans out there, Ugandan scientists say that their country's version of Robusta coffee has an edge over anything else from sub-Saharan Africa. But what exactly defines a good coffee anyway? CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga went to find out on Grassroots.
A taste of quality. Yvette Agaba has sampled a variety of coffees from sub-Saharan Africa, but she enjoys the Ugandan varieties better.
With the many times I've cup-tasted coffees, I think Uganda has a very good advantage and very good coffees, yes, on the market compared to Kenya and Ethiopia. And Burundi. Ethiopia is very good.
And Ugandan scientists agree with her preference.
We tested the cup quality on we use the scale, the quality is specialty coffee, the Specialty Coffee Association of American quality scale. And on this scale, our coffee was scoring above 80%. And normally, any coffees that score on that scale above 80% qualifies for a premium coffee.
But what defines good coffee?
Among these properties we look for the body, the acidity, and the different flavor notes that are found in very many different cups.
Walking through this shop with its variety of coffees, the aromas are thick and chocolatey. But the taste is up to the customers. Arion Wambali is a passionate coffee drinker.
When I come to Mukago Coffee, it is purely a blend of both Robusta coffee and Arabic coffee, and I like the flavors. They are wow.
Baristas are now brewing a variety of flavors to attract more coffee lovers like Arion. The flavors include cappuccino, latte, and macchiato, among others.
We not only serve a coffee, but we go ahead and look out for the good quality coffee. We have excellent roasters who do that, and we also have excellent baristas. I mean, the brewing technique is up there.
Uganda produces 80% Robusta coffee and 20% Arabica, but much of the coffee is exported. And while some coffee lovers are keen and selective on the origin of the beverage, many others care less as long as they get a cup of their daily dose of caffeine. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala.
As a member of the Kenya-Ethiopia Coffee Alliance, I object to the characterization of our coffee as inferior. But let's move on. Mara Phones is a subsidiary of the Mara Corporation. It launched Africa's first smartphone manufacturing facilities in Rwanda and South Africa this year. And it's now announced that it's exporting these made-in-Africa handsets to 43 different markets around the world. It has introduced 2 smartphones into the market. CGTN visited its Rwanda factory to figure out how it's faring so far. Here's Ucho Koronko with that story.
Mara's uniquely homemade and high-tech smartphones are an exciting prospect for Africa. While it is not the first to have marketed an African-made phone, Eddie Sabera says it is the first to produce and assemble the entirety of its product.
Challenge the first one is, as much as we are producing our phones, raw materials still need to be imported, because the unfortunate part of our continent, Africa, is the main source of the raw materials. But the industry has not developed that much to the point where we can actually produce such as chipset to be able to have them, which is some of the raw materials that are required in the telecoms.
With Asian manufacturers like Tecno and Samsung currently dominating Africa's smartphone markets, Mr. Sabera also says that surprisingly its highest number of orders come from Europe and the US.
We've now reached 46 countries until this Friday, the last Friday I mean, which gives us confidence that sales are moving very, very well. And the surprise behind it is that we also have the highest ranked country is actually Germany. We have also the UK, we have Switzerland, we have France. So it's not only Africa who's actually enjoying our phones, but it's also the rest of the world.
But for the average African, the pricing might be a little too steep. Mara's X and Z models retail at $190 and $130 respectively. That's because compared to its competitors, who mostly import the components, Mara actually makes them.
As much as we have managed to produce a phone that is, compared to its specs, is very affordable, but we still have a challenge with the population that still can't afford it. So what we've done is we went to the next level to the extent of finding alternative ways to make it affordable by looking at approaching financial institutions, included the banks, for an asset financing model, whereby the banks can allow its customers to buy phones from us and pay in installment of 3, 6, 12 months.
Mara is playing a huge role in not just job creation, but also skills development on the continent. In Rwanda alone, the number of employees is projected to rise from around 200 today to more than 500 in the next 5 years. Uchiro Koronkwo, CGTN.
All right, and a quick run through the currencies here for you. So headline inflation really in Nigeria is our focus. It's risen for the third month in a row. The data from the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics points out that this is the longest consistent run of rising inflation rate in about 2 years at 11.5%, 11.85% in fact. This is also the highest CPI reading since April, and it's all essentially linked back to the country's trade policies. Remember, Nigeria did close her land border with Benin in August, and authorities essentially stopped all land-based trade. There's a straight line between that trade policy and the rise in food and non-food inflation that we're seeing in the data right now. That's a run through your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.